did.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
All
Okay,
right.
well, in that case, let's talk now that I got the tech out
All
of the
right,
way.
Jens. So we're here with a legendary trumpet player, Jens Lindemann. Jens, how's it going?
Great, 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 Eric. Thanks for chiming in. I'd like everybody to know, all those people that happen to be watching, I actually pushed the share button on my own Facebook page, and for the first time ever, I did that. Eric just taught me something, and I feel like a big boy now. I'm going to have some big boy coffee. Thank you for that, Eric.
That's good. Let me get my coffee as well. Mine's not big boy, but anyways, first I want to apologize for everyone that Thursday last week we couldn't go live. There was a issue with Facebook. You know, they got wind that the Jens Lindemann was about to go live on Facebook, and they were like, no, we're not doing that. So anyways, I appreciate it, Jens, that you're back, and everyone who stuck around. You know, this is going to be great. A lot of questions coming in. This is going to be very loose. It's just a brass chat. Just to kind of keep everyone engaged as everyone is stay at home. And,
Cool.
and as all these conferences got canceled, you know, NTC, ITG, ITF, and the list goes on, you know, we're not able to kind of see everybody. So this is a great way to kind of touch base and kind of keep connected with everyone as we're all still at home.
I would agree, Eric. A lot of us have been reaching literally around the virtual world and reconnecting with people many of us haven't talked to in a long time, and using technologies like Zoom and other platforms to re-engage not just friendships, but collegial relationships, and perhaps most importantly, the dissemination of education, which is actually a really cool plus. People are all sitting around going, well, what do I do? I'm not getting on a plane, so I might as well talk to folks from at home. And I have been wonderfully amazed at how much interest there has been around the world from people you just reach out to and that have really given of their time and effort to get involved in projects such as this one.
Yeah, it's great. So the first question everyone's been asking, how is Jens doing?
How am I doing? Well, listen, I am like everybody else on the planet right now. The first few weeks, first of all, I'm in Los Angeles here in California, and we were sequestered by our governor a few weeks ago to stay indoors. So leaving the house means mask and gloves and the whole 9 yards, and people are taking it very seriously here. Nobody's playing around. So I think how that affects the psyche of all of us as musicians is that we're hardwired to play. We're hardwired to play for people. If we're not putting that energy out, we also can't take that energy back and be renewed by it. So it's at first it's very, very frustrating, and you just kind of have to sit back and go, well, how can I be creative and do something that impacts the world? And you start to realize very quickly how humble you have to be. I don't know whether you noticed it or not, Eric. A couple days ago, I put up a post with 32 trumpet stars from around the world.
Yes, it was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just literally 20 minutes ago, we hit 100,000 views on YouTube. And what's really cool about that project is, first of all, every single person that I reached out to responded in about 10 seconds. And they didn't even ask what. They just said, let's do it. Whatever it is, we're in. And the overarching theme for the project itself was a tribute. It started off as an idea to honor my great friend and a friend to all of us, Ryan Anthony, who is living his illness very, very openly now and has been for years, and started the organization Cancer Blows, which has literally impacted millions of people around the world. So we wanted to do something to honor Ryan, who is ultimately in isolation. We're isolated in our homes, but he's isolated in hospital. And then I was watching all these news reviews about healthcare workers in particular who are on the front lines, who are putting their lives in danger. These people didn't sign up for that. You know, that's not in the job description when you're a doctor or a caretaker. And so that it naturally morphed into that kind of a message. And what was cool about it is the response has been excellent outside of the trumpet community. And I think that's the point I kind of wanted to make. It's not so much that I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about the fact that we, as trumpet geeks, which I'm assuming most people on this broadcast right now are, our ultimate job, our mission, regardless of the techniques and the products that we'll talk about today and things that really mean something to us, our goal should be, how do we get that out there into the world and share what we do to make others feel good? So that's one of the things I've really been quite obsessed with the last couple of weeks while sitting here at home trying to think of things to do.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And on that creative way, at UCLA, how is the trumpet studio adapting? How teaching-wise, how are you changing things to make this all work?
It's interesting. UCLA is on a quarter system, which means our year starts much later. We don't start until October, which is great. We have an extended summer, but we go much later in the year. So we're not going to finish until mid-June. I think our university and our students, like students everywhere, we're all trying to figure it out. Through platforms like this one, Zoom in particular, although I know there are other ones. You have to be creative, and we have all been creative, both me and the students, sharing and swapping information and ideas with one another on how best to learn. And it's a work in progress, and I mean that positively. Everybody's doing the best they can. And the irony is, I told all of them this, I think we're all, both the teacher-student mentor relationship, as well as other projects like the one I just did, and things that we're doing right now, none of this would have happened if we were not forced to be in isolation like this. So there's good that's going to come out of it. I'm a fervent believer that we're actually going to learn more in ways that we couldn't have learned or wouldn't have thought to have learned were at a more traditional setup. So everybody's been really cool about just rolling with it. We're all doing the best we can.
Yeah, it's been super fun for us, especially to catch up with, you, Rex Richardson. The other day I got in Zoom with the VCU Trumpet Studio, did a presentation for them, just different ways we can kind of stay connected. That's super awesome. And then, the National Trumpet Competition, unfortunately, got canceled. What does NTC mean to you? And I know you're going to bring your trumpet ensemble. It was going to be a great event, and this happened.
Yeah, well, my own background with competitions goes right to my own youth. When I was 17, I decided I wanted to be a soloist, and I spent the next 8 years doing no fewer than 40 solo competitions. Everything from local, regional, provincial in Canada to national, and then ultimately international. And I can promise you and your listeners, I lost almost all of them, okay? But what I did do was I learned a lot of things about not so much how I prepared, but usually how I didn't prepare. And that can only happen in the aftermath once a competition has been completed. So the idea of winning or losing was not, initially that's the motivation because you think that's what the motivation should be. But the thing that you actually learn from doing it is how you yourself get ready to do something that has a prescribed deadline. As a result, my entire life, I have been a huge fan of competitions. I will debate that with anybody that says competitions are ineffective, or worse yet, that they're stupid. The metrics to decide who should win and who should lose is not fair. It's not artistic. I say that's a pile of crap. That's just people sitting around wanting to be contrarians. You can only learn by preparing for something and then find out what the result is, okay? The result may not be to your liking, but that's not even the point. It doesn't matter. If you win the biggest contest in the world, you're a superstar for a couple of weeks, and you get your page in the ITG journal, and you might get a recital, and then that's it. What have you done for us lately? So the next page is turned right away. So I'm a big believer in contests because it tests an individual's or a group's willingness to really go the extra mile and try something of excellence, which is worthy and which is measured, and the measurement may or may not be something that feels fair, but then isn't that a microcosm for life itself? I mean, seriously, and I'll leave you with this one thought. I did a big competition when I think I was 23 years old, 22 or 23. And it was the last year of eligibility that I had for the Montreal Symphony Concerto competition. And if I won, I got to play with the orchestra. And there was an 18-year-old flute player in the finals as well. And everybody said it was apples and oranges. We both played well in the finals. Who won? The flute player. And I called my father in Edmonton. You complain to your folks because your folks love you. And I spent months getting ready for this. And I said, man, it just wasn't fair. I played so well. It could have gone either way. It was my last year of eligibility. They should have given it to me. She had 4 more years to do it. I'm sure she would have won it. And my father listened very patiently. And then the good German immigrant that he is, when I finished, he said, well, I guess it wasn't obvious enough that you was a winner. Next time, practice more. Don't complain to me. Boom. And he hung up. And he meant it.
Message received.
Well, it was the best form of tough love, because he was basically saying, who cares? It doesn't really matter. How you feel about it right now and what you do in the next step, that's the real goal. And I think to that end, Eric, we can easily parlay that into many of your viewers that are aspiring to an orchestra career, for instance. Orchestra jobs aren't handed out. You have to audition for them. You've got to step in line and you've got to play a 6-second excerpt, and you got to do 7 or 8 of those, and that decides whether you have a career and a pension or not. I mean, think about how absurd that whole process is. And yet, We love it. We love the chase. We love thinking, maybe I can do it. Maybe that can be me. And that's the thing that drives us. So it's a very important thing to look inward and say that too is a competition. And the competition is between who? You and yourself. So I'm a big fan of promoting that. And as a result, I'm a huge fan of everything that NTC is about. Not only is it a competition, they also have a lot of master classes that are now built in. It's sort of evolved into a mini ITG of sorts. So any chance you can go out there to hear people and measure yourself against others, and then more importantly, listen to what others have to say, both on stage with their horns and on stage just talking at some of the seminars, we can only win from that.
Yeah, that's great. You know, the National Trumpet Competition, you know, the organization, how Denny runs it, the board, it's amazing. And us as exhibitors and sponsors, we appreciate everything they're doing. And that conference is unique to us because we get to see trumpet ensembles as a whole. So they come to see us as with all their friends and all their buddies. And
Right.
it's super cool to see how they interact because it's different than the International Trumpet Guild and a few other places. But speaking of International Trumpet Guild, you know, of course, that's canceled. That's a super bummer. So what does ITG mean to you? And when was your first ITG?
My first ITG was in 1987. I think it was 1987 in Dallas, Fort Worth. I think that's where it was. And I was in the solo competition, which I also didn't win. I came in second, but that was okay. We did. It was all part of the process. But that was a pivotal experience for me, not only because I got to hear all of those great trumpet players, but I also saw Mark Gould in concert for the first time.
Okay.
And I saw him in lecture. So it wasn't just that I heard Mark play, and Mark's playing is spectacular, especially the diversity, the range of his playing. Former principal of the Metropolitan Opera, and then he can sit in with any jazz group and play incredibly. And then I heard him talking about his approach and philosophy, and I knew right at that minute, this is the guy I want to study with for my master's degree. Prior to that, I'd been working with James Thompson up in Montreal, who was also the foundation of how I approach playing. And Mark is what I call finishing school, which is what graduate school should be. That happened at the ITG. And had I not gone to the ITG, I wouldn't have seen Mark. I wouldn't have been obsessed with this man who has become not only a great mentor, but a wonderful friend to me. He literally changed my life. Years later, so that's 1987. So 21 years later, in 2008, I actually hosted the ITG conference up in Banff in Canada. And it took up about 2 years of my life and every free minute that I had. But it was an epic experience putting 1,000 trumpet players into one place. And it was worth every bit of effort. So I'm a huge fan of us promoting and supporting each other because we have to. Okay, our job is to get our message out there past the trumpet players. I'm very fond of saying trumpet players will never help you. They won't give you gigs, okay? And they're not going to pay for your concerts. They're going to sneak in for free. So let's just accept that we're all going to address that. And that's just reality, true. Okay? So with that being said, if we know those are the parameters, then we might as well accept the fact that what we should be doing is a free exchange of information with one another so that we give each other the opportunities to maybe do something abroad. And that's where organizations like ITG and NTC have been invaluable in my life.
Yeah, so the International Trumpet Guild was in Columbus, Ohio this year. Unfortunately, got canceled. Next year, it'll be in Anaheim, 2021. Yeah, Anaheim, California. It was a great event in 2016 was in Anaheim. Did you have fun at that event? What did you do in 2016 since that's kind of like your home turf?
Well, it's what happens at every one of these conferences is ultimately like a giant gathering. It's like a wedding reception, you know, with 1,000 people. And, you know, when you get married, you realize if you even have hundreds of people, it's impossible to spend more than 5 or 10 minutes with every person because time runs out. And that's what ITG is. It's a smorgasbord of people that just get together. You hang out, you get into deep conversations, you party together, you go listen to concerts. It is the ultimate form of congratulating each other on what we're doing. And I'm a fervent believer in approaching it that way. The very first time I ever went to an ITG, remember I was young then, and I think when you're younger, you constantly have this feeling that maybe you have to prove something, whether it's in your studio at a university or in your high school band class, or even as a young emerging professional, that you have something to prove. Trust me, you have nothing to prove, okay? You will prove to one person yourself. And the sooner you adopt that credo, the sooner you start going to things like ITG or even doing competitions, and you view them as opportunities to celebrate work that you've done to date or a life that you've lived to date. And then you can share that with others and find out what they're doing. So we take away this whole notion of imposing something on the audience, but rather embracing them and bringing them in. And in order to embrace, you have to ask questions and listen. It can't just be about you putting something out. It also has to be about you taking something in. And those conferences are brilliant for that. I mean, think about it. Who else would go to a trumpet conference? Trumpet players, lead pipes, bell flares, mouthpieces. Oh, that's what we're here to talk about, right? Geek talk. No one cares except us.
Maybe. Or a couple people, but we'll see. Anyway, so I'm monitoring Facebook. Some messengers, some questions are coming in. So to see what people want to talk about. A couple of people asked about your Canadian brass days. What was it like playing with Canadian brass and Ryan Anthony? Just talk about that a little bit.
The Canadian brass experience was in some ways, one of the greatest things that's ever happened in my life. You got to remember, when I was a kid growing up in Canada, they were rock stars to us. And what I didn't realize, because I was in Canada and I hadn't traveled anywhere yet, they were rock stars around the world, in the brass world. I had a poster up in my bedroom at home, and I'd come back from some semester at university. I was really depressed or bummed out about something. And my mother, she took pity on me, and she found a photograph of me, and she cut out my head and she pasted it over the heads of one of the guys in the Canadian brass. So I walked into my bedroom and I saw myself, and she didn't know anything about any instruments. And it turned out she's like voodoo mom. She put my head over Fred Mills, who actually replaced 12 years later. So when the Canadian brass called me, it was the thrill of a lifetime. Just prior to that, I was fully on the track to a classically oriented solo career, and had really measured my whole life up to that minute in that direction. And when the Canadian brass called, it was all over, in the sense that you stopped everything you were doing and you gave in to the collective idea that you could be part of a group like this that got to play classical music, and then virtuosic solos, and then jazz and Dixieland, and then spoofs on operas, and do this all in 2 hours and play for thousands of people every night, traveling around the world. It was an incredible experience, and it changed my life. And then, of course, because we're a little biased toward trumpets today in particular, playing with Ronnie Rahm for 4 years was... Again, I've seen him a number of times at some of Ryan's Cancer Blows events, and I love that man. I have never, ever, and I don't think I ever will, play with a more consistent trumpet player in my life. Ronnie just doesn't miss. And when he does, it's like, what happened? It's unheard of. And so getting to play with somebody like that, who was my hero and then my colleague for 4 years, I mean, man, think of it. You're in your 20s and you're getting that kind of experience. And then when Ronnie left and I got to play with Ryan for another almost 2 years, I guess it was, in the group, Ryan, of course, has now become one of my closest friends and colleagues, and we've done many things since. So the Canadian brass was a pivotal time in my life to meet those people and then continue paying forward what they do musically, but also what they mean to me personally and professionally. Yeah,
that's great stuff. I got to hang out with Ron Rahm a little bit. Just a few months back, we were in Brazil. So that was super fun to get to meet him and his wife, and everything was great. Speaking of Ryan Anthony, he's inspirational. He's always amazing. What did you and Ryan do to manage physically and mentally the day-to-day use of the Canadian brass, and how did you manage?
It's a very good question, because when I first joined the group, prior to being there with Ryan, I used to do long warm-ups, okay? Don't get me started on that right now. But I did all the things that trumpet geeks do when they're young. And I realized very, very quickly on that if I was going to be committed to an hour-and-a-half, 2-hour-long warm-up routine before playing a concert at night, I wasn't going to be able to continue with this career. You have to be very, very intelligent. Every night you're playing in a different space. It's a different acoustic. You're in a different city, a different time zone. All the rules that we grew up with, they get tossed out the window. And you start very quickly focusing on efficiency. And that's what we'll talk about when we get into mouthpieces here. You have to be efficient more than you have to be excellent. And if you are efficient, you will become more and more excellent and more consistent, the kind of consistency that Ronnie has. When Ryan joined the group, it was really fun, because the character trait of Ryan's that I've always loved, because when we left Canadian Brass, we also started a group called the All-Star Brass, which got together up in Banff. We did a number of recordings, and it was very intense, quick time together 1 week, and then we'd throw together a recording in 3 days. But Ryan, even in the Canadian Brass, he'd have this look on his face right before the most difficult lick you might have to play, say toccata and fugue, and the big arpeggios, and thousands of people or tens of thousands more on TV are watching you. and you're thinking, you got to play this terrifying thing. And we're sitting across from each other. He would look you right in the eye, and he would start grinning like, you ready to go for it? Yeah, man, let's go for it. He'd be smiling for the most terrifying thing. He was like this happy-looking assassin, you know? And then you'd play these licks, and 9 times out of 10, we would crush it. He'd be like, yeah! And when we didn't, he would smile even bigger. He'd be like, yeah, it doesn't matter. We went for it. And he has been hardwired like that his whole life. And of course, what you learn about it years later when you don't have that kind of joy to always play around is that very temperament is the thing that you should bring into not just the practice room, but the concert stage as well. It's all based on the work that you do before you get to the stage. The stage itself is just the revelation of how hard you worked up to that given moment. Now you get to share it. When it's over, even if you nail it, you have to do it again tomorrow. So what does it really mean? Hence, your approach should be, and this is why I love Ryan so much, not just as a colleague, but also as a dear friend, this love for life and sharing that translates as soon as you pick up the instrument. Why would you be angry playing the trumpet? Angry trumpet players, I delete them from my speed dial. Yeah, I don't have no time for that.
So what are a few of your most well-known experiences musically, or something that's in your mind that you'll never forget? It was just a great experience musically.
Ooh, oh man, there are so many. If I think about how many, the first 2 that come to mind when you're asked a spontaneous question like that, I would have to say one was definitely getting to do a solo performance at Carnegie Hall with a symphony orchestra with my parents in the audience. They'd never been to New York City, so I flew them there, a big fancy hotel, and they were sitting out in the audience, and Marty Hackelman, my colleague from the All-Star Brass, whose daughter played in the symphony, and Mark Gould, my mentor, they were sitting out in the audience, and they're sitting there together. And you're standing on stage at Carnegie Hall. You should be freaking out, right? And I was thinking, this is like a rock and roll concert or like a sporting event. You walked on stage, and I was filled with such a joy and a peace. It's kind of like, I can't wait to do this, to share this with people. And people commented on it after, saying, man, you look so relaxed up there. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you be? You dream your whole life of this. Why would you be terrified? And it sticks in your head that those are the things we should try to remember about any performance, whether it's something really unique like Carnegie Hall experience and many others that I could recount, but that would just be storytelling, or something as simple as a couple nights a week, my wife and I get on the balcony here in our place, and you can see behind me there's a canyon. There's a couple of thousand homes over there, people I've never met and will probably never meet in my life. And we play a little mini concert for them, 10 or 12 minutes cool. Only, just 10 or 12 minutes. They always clap and they ask for more, but you never give it to them, never, you know? And you find a way to bring joy to people that you can't even see, but it has meaning, especially in these times. So, yeah.
Yeah, one of the moments for me personally was probably about 20 years ago now, the Brass Band of Battle Creek. You know, great group. You play with that group. I went to Western Michigan University with Steve Jones and Scott Thornburg. So we got to go to the concerts all the time. Yeah. And then one time, man, you always sound amazing, but you were sounding really good. And at the end, I'm like, I got to go meet him. So we go backstage, and I'm a little nervous. I'm like, that's Jens. You know, I walk up, and I'm like, Jens, my name is Eric. You know, I play trumpet. He's like, I knew you'd play trumpet. I was like, well, how'd you know that? He's like, I could smell you coming.
That's true.
That day, I was like, yes, this is the guy.
You had that look on your face, like if I dropped raw meat on the floor, you would dive for it. You know, you could see that coming in people's eyes. Like, yeah, I'm a trumpet player. I'm like, I know your type. I'm one too. You know, just don't tell the rest of the world we're like that.
Right. Oh, so that was super fun because the Brass Band of Battle Creek. It was close to my heart just because I got to hear them all the time. All you guys always sound amazing. So how many years have you played in Brass Band of Battle Creek? And talk about that a little bit.
Long time now. It's going on 15, 16 years, I guess. In fact, it's the only band or pre-formed ensemble that I play with in my life. We meet twice a year, as you know. And it's like a giant dysfunctional family of amazing players and personalities that gets together for 4 days and plays a concert and occasionally does recordings. Excuse me. I started off by playing flugelhorn in the band for many, many years. And then the great Pete Roberts was the soprano cornet player. Right. The greatest soprano cornet player in the history of the instrument. I know any Brits that are listening to this will, 99% of them will agree, and there's always a contrarian or two. Well, I'm not entirely certain of that. Well, you can pick your team. I'm going with the 99%. Pete Roberts was stunning player. And I remember sitting there going, who is this guy who never says anything and chews gum on stage and then sounds like an angel? And apparently, I started getting to know him a little better. For his job, he drove an ambulance around in northern England. He's not even a trumpet player. He's like a guy who drives like a senior citizen bus and then plays the instrument like that. And it was something to behold. And then when Pete retired, I said, I'd really love to take on the challenge of the soprano chair. And I was, thought, I'm famous. I've done a lot of things. I'm a good trumpet player. I can do this. Well, let me tell you. If anything will ever humble you, it is the soprano cornet, okay? As Mark Gould calls it, the fish horn. It's just one of those instruments that you start to realize why a guy like Pete Roberts was so good. It is all he did. You don't just pick up a soprano and decide it's just another horn. You have to respect what the instrument does, what it can't do. Mouthpiece choice, which we're going to get to here, becomes pivotally important. Style, understanding when you have to blend with the ensemble, and when you have to be literally the piccolo of the flute section, where you're not supposed to blend. You're literally supposed to be your own color. So people that are obsessed with trying to blend in with the cornet sound, I don't think they get it. Pete was able to do that, and then he had the second gear, and then he would dial back and forth between that, and that is an art form of the highest order. So I've been playing that chair for the last 5 or 6 years, and it has been an awesome challenge, and every single time I feel humbled. When I finish concerts, I never go, oh, that was fun. I always think to myself, all right, you survived most of it, never all of it.
I remember one concert, I think it was Pete was playing, I think it was Flowerdale. Is that correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
When he played that live, I'm just, okay, that's how it goes.
That is how it goes. And you become absolutely in awe of, and incidentally, the brass band of Battle Creek is a microcosm of the massive brass banding world that's out there. And they are their own subculture. It's a cult-like scene, and those players, so many of them play at the highest level of artistry. And most of us in North America and many other parts of the world never know anything about them. Boy, you really have to go check out some of these great bands because they play with technique and musicality that the rest of us can learn many, many things from.
Yeah. So outside of this stay-at-home order, what does the typical Jens Lindemann day look like?
Usually, because people that know me, they sort of, if there is such a thing as confirmed ADD, I'm probably it, okay? I think I check off most of the boxes on that, but I've always seen that as a plus. I view it as a badge of honor, a way for non-creative people to define weirdly creative folks. I'm going to stick with that theory. So where I'm going with it is I don't sleep very much. My mind is sort of working overtime all the time. And my biggest challenge, like most people's, I suppose, but in my case, a personal challenge that I'm willing to confess right now, is staying on track and focused on the specific tasks that have to get done. That includes the trumpet, of course, and anything else in your life. Balancing out your career, balancing out your family, balancing out the needs of students. And you don't always hit it. But the challenge is to say, get up every day and have a specific purpose and a focus. And when I take the time to think about that, which these days we all have a lot more time just to think,
we do.
You start to appreciate the fact that the trumpet has taken me to this place in my life. This is, without the trumpet, I'm not here talking to you and being an influencer to students and other people that have aspirations to do anything that I might have done to date. And again, that's a humbling sense of responsibility. You asked me a little earlier about a moment I might remember. The very first thought I had actually had nothing to do with the trumpet per se. It was receiving something called the Order of Canada, which is the highest civic distinction that our country confers on people. And I'll tell you what, to this day, when I even think about it, I'm humbled beyond words, because you realize right away when you wear that representative pin that they give you, that you now have a responsibility to represent not just who you are and what you do for a living, but your country and ultimately the legacy that brought you to where you are. It's not just about you. If it wasn't for great early band directors in middle school and high school, and then university professors, if all those things don't line up, the competitions, the ones that you lose, and then ultimately you start to do a little better, a career like Canadian Brass, starting at UCLA, you start looking at the whole tapestry of your life, and then somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, we think what you've done is prominent, and we'd like to confer this on you. Well, all of a sudden you realize that there were so many people involved in that, you have to carry that responsibility forward. So Eric, I think that's probably my biggest challenge, is waking up every day and reminding myself that at this point in my life and career, that's ultimately my obligation, is to pay that forward in some manner. And that's a wonderful way to wake up, I think, and try to do something.
Yeah, that's amazing. So typically in a year, how many days do you travel?
When I was with Canadian Brass, it's a better metric when I talk about Canadian Brass. When we were with them at that time in the group's career, I'm not sure how much they're still touring to that extent now, but certainly back then we were out 7.5, 8 months out of the year. So I would say 2/3 of the year we were gone, and doing up to 120, 130 concerts some years. So you can do your own math on how much travel is involved with that. I would say my career now hovers closer to 50, maybe 60 concerts a year, which is just fine and very manageable. And it allows me to take off maybe 3 or 4 days at a time. If I'm gone for any longer than a week, that's very rare now. And 2 weeks is almost unheard of. Whereas 3 or 4 week tours with Canadian Brass were normal. I mean, imagine our biggest time of the year was middle of November until Christmas Day, and you're out every night. And when I came home for Christmas, do you really think I was in a Christmas spirit? I don't think so. I didn't even want to see the trumpet. I put it in a case for 5 days. There's no way. Anybody that says, yes, after a 4-week tour, I immediately get up and start practicing. If you do that, you're either lying or you're stupid, okay? No, you must take time off to get your head together. And then by the time I came out of that funk of celebrating holidays for the rest of the world, holidays were over, and I'm ready to chill, but the rest of the world is ready to go back to work after January 1. So it's a much more manageable schedule now. And most importantly, I get to pick when and where and who I get to play with. There's a lot of variety, and I think that kind of variety keeps things interesting for me as well.
Yeah, that's super cool. So how do you manage physically practicing when you're on the road? Because sometimes you don't get a practice room. You just have to make do wherever you possibly can practice. So what do you do?
Oh yeah, when this sequestration first started, I put kind of a funny, goofy video up on YouTube about using different practice mutes and having different techniques for being able to work at home so that your loved ones and neighbors don't kill you. Because let's face it, let's be honest, when you're practicing the trumpet, it's not supposed to sound good. You're supposed to sound like crap because you're working on things that you can't do. Mm-hmm. If you sit there practicing things you can do, you sort of miss the whole point of what practice is. But, as with all humor, there is truth beneath it. So as a result, you get pretty creative in terms of mute usage. And this will parlay very quickly into our discussion about mouthpieces. When you use things like practice mutes, which we all tend to fear the first time we stuff them, it's too much compression, there's back pressure. It's like, well, that's exactly it. Maybe you should actually learn what you can learn about the trumpet by not blowing as hard, by learning how to feather something. And things like practice mutes, they force you to sort of relax and play very efficiently into the center of a note instead of trying to overpower the horn. It's a practice mute. You're not supposed to overpower the room. You're supposed to be working on things and looking internally, right? So when you're on the road, you get very creative in terms of, Yamaha makes a very good silent brass contraption, which I use quite fervently. And there's a lot of other companies that make silent mutes. You can do a fair bit of work there. You can also get very creative, like Doc Severinsen. There's not a stairwell in the world that Doc Severinsen hasn't found. That's where he likes to practice. Big, boomy echo chambers, and you can do that in parking lots and other places. So you have to be creative when you're looking for a place to work, but you also have to be open-minded enough to understand, of course, it's imperfect. How can I make it a more perfect situation?
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think, if anything, students right now that are trapped in small spaces, and how do you stay not only from not getting bored, but how do you not become depressed, thinking I'm sort of stuck in this scenario? this is a wonderful opportunity to really think creatively about how you practice and even why you practice. So I think there's an upside to it.
Wow, that's great stuff. I love how you talk about the positives of playing in a practice mute or a different situation rather than just to focus on the negatives. That's great stuff.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Let's see here. Since you mentioned mouthpieces, I guess we can dive into some mouthpiece questions. So when did you start playing Pickett brass mouthpieces?
I started playing Pickett. The whole genesis of my mouthpiece career, we'll go to the beginning, and then take you to where I am now. I literally pulled out of the trumpet case when I was 12 years old in 7th grade, a Box 7C. That's what came with the rental Olds trumpet that we got in band class. And you just pulled it out and you shoved it in there. End of story. As you started to improve and got better and better, I started practicing, or rather taking lessons from orchestral players who played bigger gear, ranging in the range of a 1, 1.5, 1.25 C, using generic Bach terminology, which we can all sort of relate to. So I graduated up to that in college. And then by the time I left college, I met Alan Vizzuti. For those of you that don't know Alan Vizzuti, you should know Alan Vizzuti. And if you don't, Google him right after you hang up on this chat, okay? He's super famous. Plus, he's on my speed dial right there, okay? That being said...
And Al Vizzuti and I share the same birthday, so...
Oh, look at that. Well, Alain Trudel, the super famous trombonist, and I share the same birthday. Same year even, but that's a whole other topic too. Okay, that being said, so my studies were very orchestrally oriented, as they would be with orchestra players, and I played gear that hovered around that size. By the time I got to Canadian brass, I was starting to modify, and having met and played with Alan Vizzuti, to the concept that I really talk about, which is known as efficiency. Okay, efficiency of playing, and we'll get to that in just a minute. I left, and then by the time I was in Canadian brass, Yamaha was making some custom mouthpieces. There's actually still a line of mouthpieces with Yamaha called the Lead and the Regular. And they were actually listed originally as Lindemann and Rom, but they knew both of us were going to be gone one day, so they still wanted to be able to market it. The Lindemann was a piccolo mouthpiece, and the Regular was Ronnie's B-flat mouthpiece. So you have a way to market something. Fast forward out of Canadian brass, I then started playing GR mouthpieces and played that for a number of years, really until about the time that I met Peter. And if I have to do the math on this, what's nice about Peter is that I actually forget when I got to meet him. The minute I met him, I felt like I'd known him my whole life. But let's say it was somewhere in the last 6 or 7 years, I'm guessing. And I met Peter. And at that point, I'd already gone through all sorts of iterations of different mouthpieces. I literally must have 300 or 400 mouthpieces here, which pales into the thousands that Doc Severinsen has, but I've gone through a lot of mouthpieces. I have a good understanding of what a lot of different mouthpieces can do. So by the time I get to this point in my career, now I was interested in starting to refine some of those very concepts. This is where I got cool with Peter, because Peter was not only a young, super talented guy making these mouthpieces, he had a creativity to it that, again, I wanted to push that forward. There's a lot of established mouthpiece makers out there, and everybody makes good material. There's no secrets here to say one thing is the best. But in Peter's case in particular, I loved his curiosity to sort of be super open-minded about what my particular needs were. And as a result, we started experimenting a little bit. I loved the speed and efficiency with which he worked, number one. And I loved his creative thought process when he was making mouthpieces. And I was sort of ready for that. I don't think I would have been ready for a Peter Pickett earlier on, but I am now. And now it's interesting for me to tell the story about how I got to this stage. So he made for me some mouthpieces that I was trying out. And then it got really interesting. We had one very pivotal moment, and it was about 6 years ago when Ryan Anthony got ill, and he contracted multiple myeloma, which is no secret to any of us. And he was still playing principal trumpet with the Dallas Symphony. And Ryan's my wingman. You know, he's my wingman in Canadian brass, as I told you earlier, and he's my buddy, and I love him, and I respect him. And he was telling me, confiding in me, that it was getting more and more difficult to play his job at the Dallas Symphony, but he had to keep the job because he had to keep working. But the illness was getting to him. So I called Peter and I said, Peter, I need you to make a mouthpiece that will allow Ryan to play his job in the orchestra a little bit more effectively and efficiently so he doesn't have to work quite as hard. Because if you're not feeling great here or anywhere else in your body, we know it's more work than we want it to be. And he sent me a mouthpiece, which he just called the Wingman. I said, name it the Wingman. And he sent it to me in the mail, and I sent it to Ryan as a surprise. But before I sent it to him, I tried it. I'm like, this is a great mouthpiece. You got to make one for me too. So the Wingman was born. And I sent it to Ryan, and indeed, it was a super effective way for him to play his job very efficiently and effectively in the Dallas Symphony for quite a while. And that introduced him to Peter. And then he started modifying his gear appropriately. So that was sort of the beginning of our relationship. And so you can see it's much more than business. It's personal. A friendship was born, and he did something for a dear friend of mine that I will always remember Peter for. So those are the kinds of relationships that we built. And it's just been that way for a number of years up until the present. Now, do you want to jump right into what we're playing right now?
We can.
Let's do it. Kids, you see what I'm holding? It's called the polymethyl crylate mouthpiece. Look, Eric has some too. And so what I, incidentally, the reason that I ultimately sort of moved on from Radke mouthpieces, which once again, I really enjoyed playing. Don't get me wrong. And look, if I'm playing a mouthpiece, I'm enjoying it, because why would I put my career on the line playing a mouthpiece I didn't want to play? But what I really dug about Peter's mouthpieces is that they have detachable capabilities, okay? That's what I really dug about it. And he made me some fixed mouthpieces as well. Once we started getting into detachables, though, well, then it's a whole different world of possibility from tops and bottoms that you can combine. So I had to make me something called the Wingman, which was originally designed with Ryan, nice symphonic-oriented cup. Then another top, which we called the Special, and then a third cup, which we called the Piccolo. And they were all three slightly different gradients of mouthpiece depth in particular. The Special was designed especially for E-flat trumpet playing in mind. It's always been a curiosity to me why classical players decide they're going to work up standard concerti like the Haydn, the Hummel, the Neruda, play it on E-flat trumpets, but then play it on a B-flat trumpet mouthpiece. Everything you're doing on the E-flat, relatively speaking, is a fourth to a fifth higher than where you would normally spend time on a B-flat mouthpiece. Don't you think maybe we might want to consider a correlation between that and the register we're playing in and the trumpet we're playing it on? I mean, I think it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that you would modify your gear if you're going to a piccolo. You wouldn't just shove in a C trumpet mouthpiece. And those people that do, they're far and few between. And quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, I'll go on record as saying that I don't think they have necessarily discovered the full efficient potential of the piccolo trumpet unless they also consider very seriously what's going on at the mouthpiece end. This whole notion of, oh, just shove one in there, play it, practice good and hard, you'll figure it out. No, that is as meathead as it sounds, you know, and no less an authority than even the great Arturo Sandoval will tell you that. He played a 3C, and he used to joke around, you know, in master classes saying, people say, why do you play that rim? He says, well, it feels like a beer bottle. You know, it was ridiculous. He's not even a drinker, so it wasn't about that. But he was trying to make the point, why are we obsessed with mouthpieces? Just practice. But if you ask Arturo now, and I have because he's a friend of mine on my speed dial, he'll tell you, he'll be the first one to say, of course we have to think about mouthpiece choice and balance and imbalance. All of these things factor into it. So the three mouthpieces that we went with were called the Wingman, the Special, and the Piccolo. So if you have three different tops and three different bottoms, in theory you actually have, I guess that's 9 different, I can't do the math, 9 different possible mouthpieces, whatever. You have a lot of combinations that you could try. Now, where we get to the polymethyl metacrylate, I have a very talented young student, Natalie Dungy, who started studying with me a couple of years ago at UCLA. And she came in playing a mouthpiece that was made of, I think it's like buffalo horn or elk or something, some animal. I don't know what it is, but it was this black mouthpiece that I thought was plastic. And she says, no, it's actually made of a horn. I don't know where it came from. And in her case, it was because of allergies, which we could talk about. Now, when I was her age, I was first introduced to what I would call a synthetic rimmed mouthpiece, and that was played by the great David Hickman. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of that mouthpiece, but it was a white plastic top. And
was it Delrin?
That's exactly what it was. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. And so when I was a young student, I remember watching Dave play that in concert, talk about it in master classes. And it was cool. Dave Hickman is a beautiful trumpet player, spectacular. But I never thought about it again because orchestra players weren't playing that. So I thought, well, yeah, that's great. I respect him for what he is, but he's not my teacher and he's not an orchestra player. So I cast it aside. And then I started thinking about it again when I had a student come in, like Natalie, who was playing this different gear. And then I found out Peter was making these synthetic tops. I said, would you mind sending me one? Because especially now as a mentor, you want to be able to give people options, specifically when it comes to allergies. So I thought, well, it's better for me to be really informed about what this feels like and how well it compares to a regular silver or gold-plated mouthpiece. And so he sent me some mock-ups. Well, that was about 6 or 7 months ago. And I'll tell you something, Eric, I haven't gone back. And I'm not saying this as a sales point at all. I mean this in all seriousness. Every single time I touch the trumpet to my face, it just feels wonderful. There's an even temperature to it that is completely consistent. It just feels pleasant. And then I started thinking, as I do too much, you know, why, if you're going to spend hours and hours a day, would you shove metal into your face when you can put something on that just feels nicer? And as a result, I have had all my mouthpieces converted to these polymethyl methacrylate tops, and I've loved it. Now, one of the questions that will come up, if you're not going to ask it, I'm sure somebody's thinking it out there. What about the sound quality? Does it change? Is it positive or a negative change in quality? It's the first question that'll come up every single time. I have two quick answers to that. First of all, you or I will never actually hear what you or I sound like. Let me say that again. What I sound like, I will never hear for the rest of my life. Sound goes away from my bell. Even if I'm recording it, if I record it in different microphones, it's going to always sound different. I will never hear my own sound. You, Eric, will never hear your own sound.
Correct.
So once we start getting into talk about what my sound is, I correct people immediately and say, stop right there. The only thing you're allowed to talk about is how you feel about your sound. Okay, how do you feel about your sound ringing in a certain room? You don't have the permission to talk about it because you don't hear it. Okay, I say it dramatically like that to make a point, but I think your listeners will understand where I'm going with it. So with that in mind, what we really want to do is gauge how do other people hear our sound. So I've tested it. I've compared it back and forth. One of the first things you will tend to hear when you try a poly mouthpiece versus a traditional metal, whether it's silver or gold plated, is the first words that tend to come out is warmer, or that there's a pleasantness to it. I don't know how else to describe it. It's a warm feeling as opposed to something that has a little bit more punch. Now, you might say, okay, well, there's trumpet players out there saying, oh, no, I want it to do that. I need it to do that. And I say, yes, that's true. There's going to be times when that is required. But that is the tiniest fraction of what we really have to do. It is. And if you're honest with yourself, you know that to be true. So if 99% of the time, what we're striving for is the best possible sound we can get, regardless of the mouthpiece combination or the trumpet that we choose to use, that should be the thing that obsesses us. And in every taste test I've done with this, I have been wonderfully reminded by people doing the listening that almost unanimously, this is the one that they tend to choose. And just because I like playing it, I'm happy about that. Even if they might choose a different one for a certain lick or something, say, well, this one has a little bit more there, it's still not enough to sway me to go back. And I don't see any reason to ever go back to playing what I played the rest of my career. Now, with that in mind, some of your listeners might also say, yeah, but Jens, I aspire to a more traditional sectional career. I'm hoping to get into orchestra one day, or maybe even I play in an orchestra, where there are parameters and rules. The principal, he or she will say, this is what we gear up with here. And when you're trying to win the job, you don't know that, and it doesn't even matter because you're playing alone, you're not with the section. But then once you get there, there may be some of that. Now, to that end, I wanted to show you my little whiteboard here. There, I wrote 3 names on it, okay? Did you get that? Good, we'll show it later. Tom Couples, National Symphony Orchestra. Yep. Cody McClarty, Fort Worth Symphony, and his brother James, who plays in the Marine Band, all playing poly mouthpieces at their jobs, okay? So I always like to counter by saying it's all good and fine that I have a unique, interesting, and diverse career playing a lot of different styles of music, but how does it fit in when I have to play in a more traditional-oriented section? And when young players like that are telling me, I've had no negative feedback from the boss, which is the conductor, even if they have a section leader, if the section leader is like, I'm content, well, then you're probably onto something. So again, I'm not trying to convert the world to this. I happen to be converted to it. But I just think because I was exposed to it at such a young age and didn't give it much thought until many years later, the reason I'm so passionate about talking about it now is because I was the stupid one. I wasn't curious enough early on to see what are the positives and the negatives of trying different materials, not just different sizes, different feels. So if I sound like I'm really enthusiastic about discussing this, it's really because I'm enthusiastic about it, discussing the fact that I want people to think really openly, and you'll start to make your own discoveries.
Yeah, we've got a lot of positive feedback based on the acrylic tops, especially with some of the military bands, because if you have to play taps when it's 5 degrees or it's 105 degrees, the acrylic is a little more neutral. Right. It doesn't get so hot or so cold, so it feels a little more comfortable putting it up. In the same sense, a lot of marching bands in Texas have purchased dozens of them because of the fact that when it's 110 degrees, you put a mouthpiece up, you don't burn your face. And another reason, of course, you briefly mentioned brass allergies. That is a real thing. Players contact us routinely about what to look for in brass allergies. The acrylic is a great option, and it's the closest material we found to sound like brass. Delrin tends to be a little duller. The acrylic is it's a closer sound to brass that we found.
Well, it's also, it's hard. As a Canadian, you can't own a Canadian passport unless you can prove that you also own a hockey stick. Polymethylcrita is a different term for plexiglass. It's like getting your face pushed up against the glass, in the heat of battle. So I think that's sort of a cool subproduct of the fact that that's one of the other reasons I like playing it. But yes, I've heard the same thing about those different mouthpieces, and everything that you just cited, playing outdoors, whether it's hot or cold, or whether you have allergies, all very prevalent reasons to consider some kind of a poly material on your embouchure. But again, I emphasize, stay open-minded. Don't just use it because of those reasons. Why don't you think of transferring that to a regular concert hall situation or a regular practice situation? Stay open-minded. Have people critique you, perhaps even criticize you, when you're doing it. But if you love the way, first of all, this is just so logical. If you like the way something feels on your face, whether it's the size or shape of a mouthpiece, or in this particular case, we're discussing the material of the mouthpiece, well, don't you think you're going to want to spend more time just playing the trumpet? True. It's so obvious to me. And that's why I keep waiting for the party to end. Like, I'm going to hate touching this to my face, and I can't. I have had so much fun practicing on it and learning things about it again, I'm going to go on record right now saying I don't think you will ever see me go back. You can pretty much bank on that.
Yeah. Since you mentioned practice, there's a few questions we got for some younger kids. What size of mouthpiece would you recommend for anyone about 8th grade to 12th grade? What roughly in the genre, what should they be in?
Excellent question. Again, if we're going to use, and we'll use standardized Bach mouthpiece sizes just because that generic number is one that I think even with Pickett mouthpiece has a relevancy to it. But let's say for the sake of conversation, a Bach 7C or the Yamaha equivalent, which would be an 11. Yamaha numbers are based on the old Schilke numbers. So a Bach 7 or a Schilke 11. Those are mid-sized, go for it. You can play everything that you need to do. In many ways, you can play most of your career on that size. So don't think those are starter kit mouthpieces. They're not. And there's famous stories out there, and they're true, and they've been told and retold, and I'll tell it right now for anybody that hasn't heard it. The great Bud Herseth, who is the architect of orchestral playing, arguably in the world, not just in America, in the Great Chicago Symphony. Played on a 7C, had a horrible car accident, lost all sensation in his top lip, which is when the Bach Corporation built the 1X, very ominous sounding mouthpiece. And it was just so big that he could get some sensation to get his career going. What people tend to forget is that Bud Herseth was one of the most efficient trumpet players in history, which is why he could play in the Chicago Symphony on a 7C. So you throw 1X into his hand, sure, he could play that too. The question we should ask ourselves is, how did he do it? And it had to do with efficiency, not with size. So to answer the question, I'm a fervent fan of saying stick with that beginning size, like the Bach 7 or the Yamaha 11 sizes and the correlation. And My favorite all-around generic size to go for would be around a Bach 3C, or say a Yamaha 14. And I imagine the Pickett numbers are also like the 3 number.
Comparable, yes.
Yeah, the 3 is an awesome mouthpiece. I've heard players play spectacular lead trumpet on it. I've heard them improvise on it. I've heard them do it in orchestra. It's sort of that really awesome fulcrum point of mouthpieces that can kind of do everything. So if you go too much bigger or too much smaller than that midpoint, it's unnecessary. By the time you start really thinking of going to an extreme from there, from say the range of a 3 to a 7 range, you're already fairly specialized, or you should be. And if you're specialized, you're using it for a specialized purpose. The mouthpieces that I use hover closer to the 5 rim range, and which I also think is a great all-around rim size. Doc Severinsen played one and still plays one to this point his entire career. The great Bob Early, who was trumpet player in the Philadelphia Orchestra for a long time, and when I first met him in the Montreal Symphony as assistant principal, played a 5B oriented mouthpiece. It was like that size. It was a very focused rim. And incidentally, Eric, for your listeners, I don't use the term smaller. I refuse to say that. It makes me feel tiny, which I don't want to be. I call them efficient, focused, compact approaches to playing. So the rim size focuses the aperture a little bit more, and then the cup depth is the thing that starts to give a certain quality of sound to the mouthpiece. So there is no reason in the world for a young player to go any smaller than a 7 or any larger than a 3. There's a huge range of stuff that can happen right in there. Now, my last point to that is, just in case you're thinking, yes, but Jens, you don't play in an orchestra and you don't understand what orchestral needs are. First of all, I cite the 3 examples here from my whiteboard. And the other great example I like to use is John Hagstrom, who plays in the Chicago Symphony, the loudest brass section in the world. And he plays second trumpet on a rim that is similar to a 7 with a nice, deep, warm-sounding cup. So the rim size itself is not what should dictate. And don't let anybody tell you you have to play bigger rims. The thought process should always be, you could, but you don't have to. You are the one that gets to decide, not somebody deciding for you. I think it's a really important point for young players to remember.
Yes, as you mentioned, the 5 size is you're kind of like your heavy hitter, the wingman, where you kind of stay at. For piccolo, it's a little smaller. Can you kind of talk about how you approach the piccolo top and also which backbore you use?
I'm sorry, Eric, did you just say smaller? I believe you meant to say efficient, compact. Yes, thank you. Thank you. I shall virtually slap you right now. The piccolo, actually, to be honest with you, I've never even asked Peter this. I'm assuming that the rim size is close to the same as the special and the wingman, but of course the depth of the cup is slightly shallower, and you do that specifically. Back to your earlier point about practicing with practice mutes. One of the philosophies that I really adhere to, and I've said it several times, is efficiency of playing. And again, if you imagine it with the same concept as a dartboard, where you've got a center that's this big, indicating like a larger size mouthpiece versus, the bullseye, which is a little smaller, on the board. Of course, you would say it's harder to hit the bullseye, but if you ever watch those dart players, the ones on TV that like put those groupings together, you're like, how do they do that? Well, first of all, it's about excellence and efficiency. Mouthpieces are exactly the same issue, because if you have something that is larger in nature, where your first inclination is to say, oh, I could put more air through, more air is good. Well, not necessarily. In fact, when you're playing in the extreme upper register of the instrument, there's hardly any air that's actually passing through the instrument. And the great Eric Miyashiro showed me a wonderful little trick for that when he came to do a master class, where he took his lead pipe out, and then he took a piece of tissue paper and hung it, by wetting it, and then hung it off of the edge of the top end of his lead pipe, and he played a high F, really loud, and you could barely see the tissue moving at all. Then he played it 3 octaves lower on a low F, and it was a huge amount of air. So the volume of air passing through the instrument in our mid-register and low register is significant. By the time we get to upper register, there's hardly anything going through. Again, make the correlation between the fact that what you're trying to do is be efficient up there and get frequency of vibration. Which is why I also don't say things like, the quick terminology I'll give your listeners is, I don't say high and low notes anymore. I refuse to. I don't say big and small, I say efficient. And I don't say high or low notes. I have an acronym that I coined as being FAVE, which is an acronym for It's spelled F-A-V-E, faster audio vibrational experience. Yeah, I know it's corny. I threw the E in the end because I had to make a word out of it, you know? And then those are what were formerly known as high notes. I call them fave. And then I call low notes, or lower notes by definition, are save, slower audio vibrational experience.
Okay, all right.
So now you're starting to think of the vertical nature of high and low notes, which is stupid. What we're really talking about is how fast and how slowly are our lips vibrating. What frequency are they oscillating at in order for the trumpet itself to make the sound that we call a note? They're not high or low. They're faster and slower, okay? So now once you start to change that mindset, you start to change your approach to how you blow into the instrument. And that's where things like practice mutes or more focused gear kicks in. You can't blow the same way. So if you're going to back off on the air a little bit to play more efficiently or try to hit that target a little bit more centered, you have to be more efficient with your entire body, not just this blow, but also how it feels coming back into your body. And all of those variables factor into what kind of resonance you're going to get with your tone, what kind of efficiency you're going to be able to play with for everything, as well as the fact that the greatest cello players in the world that we watch, they all look so relaxed, like it's an effortless process. None of them look like they're wrestling an alligator to the ground. If they are, well, they, you might have some issues to deal with. So the size of the mouthpiece, and to your point about piccolo, that factors into it. And so as a result, you start to become a lot more sensitive to what's not just taking place going this way, but how it's also coming back. So the sensitivity value of having something that's a little bit more resistant, and resistance is our friend. It's not our enemy. Okay, we have to embrace that.
Yes.
So if you start to become sensitive, they're like baseball batters that put those weights on their bats when they're in the on deck circle, and they take them off and they come to the plate. They're doing the exact same motion, but there's an efficiency to their whole body without the weightlessness that they have now simulated and correlate to doing what they have to do. Mouthpiece choices and piccolo mouthpiece choices fall into that very same category, because I call the piccolo trumpet not a trumpet. It's its own instrument. It's not just a baby trumpet.
Right.
You have to respect it for what it truly is. And when you approach it with that kind of respect, you rethink your entire notion of how you blow into it and what material and what size of mouthpiece you'll have on one end of the trumpet. That was a long answer, but I get pretty worked up talking about mouthpieces. It's just exciting.
That's all right.
It's exciting for me.
Well, I like how you're talking about resistance, because we get that question a lot, and you have to have a natural balance of resistance compression between you, the mouthpiece, and the trumpet. If there is not that natural resistance built in, you will do it yourself. And a lot of players, if they play something like a large cup, a large throat, and large backboard, they'll say, oh, this is too tight. Well, what they're actually feeling is the tightness that something too open is actually creating in their body, and that's not a good thing.
That's exactly right. You're actually physically trying to put more air through than the mouthpiece or even the instrument would allow. Again, take this to the next logical extreme. Let's do something really absurd, like the great Wycliffe Gordon. Everybody know Wycliffe? If you don't, you better look him up, because not only is he a force of nature on the trombone, he's actually a scary trumpet player. And guess what? He has, I think you guys even make it, right?
We do.
He has a modified trombone mouthpiece with a trumpet shank.
We call it the hybrid.
You call it whatever you want. I can promise you, if you put that mouthpiece into the hands of any trumpet player, they're going to sound like idiots, okay? Only Wycliffe can sound that way, because he's a trombone player approaching the trumpet from that perspective. Now, which means, of course, trumpet players, we wouldn't think to do that. It would be absurd to put a trombone mouthpiece with a trumpet shank into a trumpet, again, unless you're Wycliffe and a force of nature. There's so much that would be taking place there. We would be inefficient players, and we wouldn't be able to do what we do. So we have to already appreciate the fact that we're dialing back from extremes like that. Well, then why wouldn't you take the next obvious step to say the biggest bore that you could create on a mouthpiece, the deepest cup that you could probably make, that is one end of the spectrum. That's the ultra extreme. The other end of that extreme would be the kinds of tiny, shallow pea shooter mouthpieces that, extreme players like a Bill Chase used, and used very efficiently. You wouldn't use that either. Totally specialized. And human nature should be that we fall somewhere in the middle, and then to one side or other of that, as opposed to the ultra extremes. Back in 2003, I woke up in the middle of the night, because I wake up, and I wrote some rant on the Trumpet Herald and Trumpet Master, a couple of those geeky websites out there that, incidentally, I subscribe to those sites. I have my own name, trumpet, Jens, and then I have a fake name that I never tell anybody. I had a student once crack the code. They once cracked the code. Well, 95% of what goes on those boards it's just stupid. It's a waste of time. But 5% invaluable. Invaluable. And so sometimes I'll have questions where I'll ask a really geeky question, but I don't ask it as my name because I'm famous. I can't do that. So I ask it as this posed name. I put this question up and I wait for like 6 answers to come back. Then I wait in 3 or 4 days later and say, I've been pondering this issue and I've come to the conclusion that, people all thank me for being online and that it's so great that you're here. Yes. Pile of crap, okay? I'm just a bigger geek than anybody else. Now,
that's good.
That being said, yeah, it's true. I wrote this Mouthpiece rant, and it's been redistributed over the years a lot, and it was just a spontaneous stream of consciousness. It's very easy to find on the internet. Again, a longer way of answering your question, Eric. That little 8-paragraph thing that I wrote up in many ways encapsulates the overarching idea of how I feel about mouthpieces and the fact that we should be looking for something that is in the mid-range of things and then slightly pushing the envelope from there, but never going to an extreme on either end.
Yeah, I totally agree. Another question came in from a younger student. If I was a freshman or sophomore in college, if I was going to work on efficiency, what kind of exercises would I start doing to work on efficiency?
Well, it's a simple question with a big answer, potentially. But so let's keep a simple question to a simple answer. And incidentally, I also subscribe to the philosophy that there is no question, like zero question about the trumpet or mouthpieces or lead pipes or anything that doesn't have a simple answer. So keep that in mind, okay? This is the sound we make for a living. As absurd as that sounds, that's what we're paid to do. So let's just keep that relative to what the problem actually is. That being said, of course, fundamentals are critical to what you do. A few days ago, I posted on my own Facebook page, I put, the trumpet trilogy of books. And that would be Arbon's, in no particular order, Arbon's, Charlier, and Clark studies, okay? Now, I know because I have them. There's dozens of, there you go, there's yours. Mine's the older generation, which tells you, the color of my cover is very different, which means I'm older than you. And there were cats that wrote into me showing me older covers than that. Those 3 books are the foundation of everything. Everything else literally is a variation of what those 3 things provide. Charlier for fluency or fluidity, okay? Arbon's is foundation. That is the foundation of everything. And if you want to use Clark studies, we're talking about fingerings, okay? An often neglected area of playing the trumpet. You don't just conceive the trumpet. There are mechanics involved. And if you don't respect that, then you don't deserve to get better. So you have to factor all those things into mind. And the reason I love the Charlier etudes, for instance, they're very musical. They cover all the bases, but they have a musical purpose and a harmonic purpose that's more advanced than what you would get out of Clark and Arbon. Yes, there are other books and other great books, but those 3 foundationally are the ones I would start with. So to answer the viewer's question, it's not just about working out of those fundamental books. Here's what's also really important about your practice sessions. It's what are you doing in those sessions? How focused are you on the task at hand? How carefully are you working on a problem? Are you letting things slip by, thinking subconsciously, I'll get to that later? Or are you going to obsess over some small passage? That 32 trumpet project that I did a couple of days ago, Sergei Nikaryakov, of course you all know, speed dial, he's right there. He was also on this project. And I met Sergei. We did a concert together in Munich, Germany with an orchestra when he was a kid. He was 16 or 17, and we were backstage. And here was this freaky little kid who could, play anything. He was playing, before we went out, he was getting ready to do Carnival of Venice, and he was practicing it backstage. And one thing that people like to think is that, well, Sergei, he's just been given the hand from above. It's like a gift that no one got except for Mozart and Sergei Nikaryakov. That's a pile of crap. You know what Sergei does differently, and Wynton Marsalis, to coin another huge icon of our instrument? What those 2 have done differently than everybody else, me included, along the way, is that they focus so carefully on perfection and efficiency. Sergei is almost Zen-like if you get to meet him in real life. He's a very earnest person who is focused on the moment, on you, on what he's saying, on what he's playing. It's like that. You want to get better at the trumpet, working on fundamentals. It's not about which fundamental books you use, even which mouthpieces you use. These are just tools to get you to where you need to go, which is how well are you focusing and how carefully are you focusing on doing it correctly. And again, it's something I get passionate about at this point in my life because I didn't do nearly enough of it. As much as I thought I did, and I guess looking back, I did a fair bit of it, but I still didn't do enough. And now it's students that I see their enthusiasm for figuring it out that actually spurs me to continue trying to get better and better at it. That's where I would start. Fundamental exercises and books, and be careful of how you're doing it so that you're efficient with your time.
Yeah, great stuff. So everyone knows you're passionate and enthusiastic about mouthpieces. Someone asked, they love your Facebook little posts about the mouthpieces on the stairs and all that kind of stuff. They eat that stuff up and they love it. Are there any other quirky videos on the horizon we should be looking out for?
There's always quirky videos. In fact, I put one on Facebook just before this, a little Peter Pickett tongue twister. So I would encourage all of your listeners to learn it. I say it once slowly. So write it down and then see how fast you can do it. Why don't you send those in to the Peter Pickett website, see who can come up with the fastest version.
Oh, that's good.
A quirky way. It is
that's good. I heard yours. It's impressive because I tried. I was like, it's hard.
It is hard, and I'm not doing it live. I did it. Okay, I just done it. But I, as you probably all well know, I do like to put up quirky videos. Because I think it's really important that we maintain a sense of humor as trumpet players. I know some professional comedians, really quite famous professional comedians, and when you meet a comedian that really is good at their craft, you start to realize how serious comedians really are. They're actually some of the most observant human beings in our society because they're looking for material. These are intelligent people. If you can have a sense of humor and even do things in a quirky manner, I think it sort of underlies this notion that you actually are not taking yourself so seriously that you think this is the be-all, end-all, but rather you're staying open-minded to what other possibilities are out there, okay? I do have a series of quirky videos which are easy to find where I play a double high G for like 10 to 15 seconds in weird settings, like going down a water slide.
I think they're cool.
Coming down a zip line, on my back in a pool, getting pulled behind a motorboat on a knee board.
I like the one in the tractor.
The one in the tractor. Well, I showed it to my 14-year-old nephew once. I said, "Hey, Keaton, check this out. It's me getting pulled, behind a speedboat, and I get up on my knees and I play a double G. This is not an easy thing to do. There's like a handful of people in the world who even think of doing it, right?" And I said, "Hey, check it out. What do you think?" And he looked at me and said, "Couldn't you play more than one note?"
Oh,
here's my point. No one cares except trumpet players. Only a trumpet player would think that's truly impressive. So if we can't have a sense of humor about ourselves, thinking, the things that mean a lot to us really only mean something to us. I promise you, if I'd played Happy Birthday on all those videos, I'd be a viral sensation today. But yeah, I like doing things like that because it's, I think it's important to just laugh about things and look at yourself laughing, because when the laughter stops, you have that moment of, it's like a refreshing moment, and you can then transfer that over into excitement and focus in your trumpet practice.
Yeah, I appreciate those videos because you make it look fun. And, one of my close friends, Vince DiMartino, we text all the time. He's amazing. He lives down the street. We play gigs routinely together. He always looks like he's always having fun. Mm-hmm. And one time he was sitting next to me, we're in a quintet. And he's like, "Well, it's just like bowling. You just have to have fun." It's the same kind of thing. I like seeing trumpet players are having fun and appreciate having fun because it's, as Vince told me one time, it is called playing trumpet, not working trumpet.
I like that. Vince DiMartino, of course.
Yeah. I was like, I was like, that makes sense. Okay. All right.
Just backtracking for a second to the question of your viewer about and one of the tangible tools that I normally use when I'm practicing is a poker chip, which if you haven't heard me say it in masterclass before, I put that on my music stand. And it's also important to practice short little sections of things, really short. I'm talking like a measure or two or a lick or two. And then I lean forward and I turn the poker chip a quarter turn. I'll play it again. If I nail it, I turn it again. Play it again. If I make a mistake, I turn the chip back. And I personally do that with 3 complete revolutions. So I try to get 12 reps, really honest reps with myself. And why it's important to combine fun and focus. So we have to, if you're just having fun, you're going to be goofing around and maybe not doing the kind of focused work that you also have to do. But you can have fun in terms of quantifying and using metrics that will show you how efficiently you are doing something on a consistent basis. So again, having a sense of humor about all of that will definitely help improve your practice sessions.
That's good. So Name a few like crazy road stories. Something that's happened on the road that's just so ridiculous. It's like, wow.
Two immediately come to mind. Okay,
Perfect.
two come to mind. They both happen to be Canadian brass. I mean, believe me, there are dozens, but I'm gonna cite two. The first two that popped into my brain. One was getting back to your theory about the piccolo trumpet. We traveled with Canadian brass from Toronto. We flew to LA, then from LA to, I think it was Tokyo, and then Tokyo to Singapore. So it was like a 34-hour flight, 4 planes. We landed at midnight, got 3 hours sleep, then got picked up in the hotel lobby at 4. We're on live national TV to play for a morning television show. And the first tune that Gene called was A Handful of Keys. So I grabbed my piccolo trumpet. No time to think, no time to panic. Live national Singapore TV. And what do you want to do? Do you want to keep your job or do you want to freak out because it doesn't seem fair? So obviously it was sink or swim time. And that was one of those, I remember finishing that going, okay, it's never going to get more crazy than that. You know, that was one example. Another example, because I'm going back far enough now to the pre-internet days, certainly pre-iPad days. I think it was in 1996. And I broke the first rule of the road, which is see your horns in the van. You know, it's all fancy. You get to the fancy hotel lobby and there's people there. And I stupidly was like, well, some of the people will load my horns into the van. So we got into the van. We drove an hour and a half to somewhere in Delaware, got out of the van, and I realized none of my trumpets were there. They were all in the hotel lobby. Now, Ronnie Rom was in the group, and he had 4 different horns with him, and none of my music. And incidentally, so like half of our show was memorized, but the first half of it was very complex, and I'd been in the band for just a few weeks at that point. So I feverishly called the hotel, got a driver to pack my bags, and have somebody drive the trumpets an hour to Delaware to the gig. Just before the concert started, we had a fax machine. Remember those things? And I'm not talking like clean faxes. I'm talking like that scrolled, rolled paper that literally the presenter came running down the hallway as we're about to walk out playing Closer Walk With Me. And he handed me this roll of music, which I stuffed into my pocket. We walked down playing Closer Walk. I'm playing on Ronnie's cornet. He's got the trumpet. And then we get through the first 3 or 4 tunes. Now, about 20 minutes into the show, I'm like, I'm in big trouble because we're about to play the Vivaldi double concerto, okay? There's no way I want to be playing the Vivaldi trumpet double on a B-flat trumpet when Ronnie's holding the pick. So while Chuck is doing his introduction to this, I'm starting to sweat and panic, going, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And from the other side of the stage, I feverishly see the limo driver waving his hands. He's got my piccolo. And I kind of slid over very casually backstage, slid back on, sat down and played. And it was like,
wow.
You know, you remember stupid moments like that where you go, I can't believe I dodged that kind of a bullet. And like I said, you have to have a sense of humor about it because, first of all, you realize you were an idiot. And secondly, you remember, don't do that again.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Let me look through here to make sure we didn't miss anyone's questions or anything. We're getting a lot, so I just want to make sure we don't miss anything as we wrap this up. Is there anything you want to talk about, Jens, before we...
No, I'm happy to just flow with this. I could be here for hours sitting and talking further, but we could plan to do it another time somewhere down the road if there want to be some follow-up questions or we can be more specific about particular things. But, we came on today to talk about Peter's mouthpieces. And incidentally, I know you held them up earlier. If you go to the website, you can see there's all sorts of cool colors and tops.
Yeah, I got Emerald City right here. I don't know if you guys can see it.
Yeah.
Orange.
I went with this one. This was actually one that I saw Vince playing, and I loved it. It looked like glacier water, like where I'm from in Canada. It's ice blue, and I just thought that's my color right there. So, like I said, anything you can do for yourselves that makes it more fun to go toward your trumpet and practice and have a good attitude about it, I think that's a good thing. For me, it's the discovery of this particular material and, as I like to say, this particular color. And once again, you can quote me on this somewhere down the road because the internet lives forever. I really don't think I'm ever going back to a metal mouthpiece. Ever.
That's just great.
Yeah.
Well, Jens, I truly appreciate this. And, next time you're in Kentucky, I'll get you some Blue Door barbecue, which is amazing.
I do. I'll get you some great Mexican food when you come out here to the West Coast, okay?
I appreciate it. And you stay safe and you take care, man.
Eric, thank you. Thanks to all your viewers today, and real pleasure. Everybody be safe yourselves and have fun, okay?
Okay.